The strangest thing I ever found in one of my houses wasn't money, secrets, or enemies. It was a family. The rain was falling hard enough to blur the city lights when I drove through the rusted gates of the mansion I hadn't visited in nearly 8 years. The place sat on the edge of town like a forgotten memory, surrounded by overgrown trees and silence. Most people thought it was abandoned. In a way, it was. I had inherited it after my father died, locked the doors, and never came back. Some buildings hold ghosts. This one held regrets. The tires crunched across the gravel driveway as thunder rolled across the sky. I stepped out into the cold night and looked up at the dark windows. Everything appeared exactly as I remembered. Empty, lifeless, untouched. Then I saw it. A faint light flickering behind a second-floor curtain. I froze. For a moment I thought I imagined it, but there it was again. Warm, yellow, alive. Someone was inside. The front door groaned as I pushed it open. Dust floated through the beam of my flashlight. The air smelled of old wood and rain. I walked slowly through the grand foyer, listening. At first there was nothing. Then I heard it. A cough. Small. Fragile. A child's cough. My chest tightened. I followed the sound down a hallway and toward the west wing. The farther I walked, the stranger everything became. Someone had cleaned part of the floor. A few candles burned on a table. There were folded blankets, empty soup cans, evidence of life hidden inside a place that had been forgotten by everyone else. When I reached the kitchen doorway, I stopped. A woman stood there holding a kitchen knife with trembling hands. Behind her were 2 children, a little boy no older than 8, a girl maybe 6. All 3 stared at me like I was the danger. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Nobody moved. The woman looked exhausted, pale skin, tired eyes, clothes carefully washed but worn from use. She stepped slightly in front of the children without saying a word. Instinct. Protection. The little girl clutched the sleeve of her mother's sweater. The boy stood straight despite the fear in his eyes. I should have called security. I should have demanded answers. Instead, I noticed the pot of soup simmering on an old portable stove. I noticed the patched backpacks near the wall. I noticed how the children kept glancing toward their mother, as if she were the only safe thing left in the world. "Who are you?" I finally asked. The woman swallowed hard. "Emily Carter," she whispered. "Please, just one word. Not an excuse, not a lie. Just a plea wrapped in dignity." And somehow, standing in the house I hated most, looking at 3 strangers who had nothing, I felt something shift inside me. Because for the first time in years, that mansion didn't feel abandoned anymore. Emily kept the knife lowered, but she did not put it down. I could not blame her. The storm outside rattled the old windows, and from her perspective, I was a stranger who had appeared in the middle of the night inside the only shelter she had left. The little boy moved closer to her side. The girl hid behind her sweater. Neither child took their eyes off me. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then I looked around the kitchen again. The portable stove, the carefully stacked canned food, the blankets folded in neat piles. Someone had worked hard to survive here. Someone had turned a forgotten corner of a dying mansion into a home. "How long have you been here?" I asked. Emily hesitated. "Almost 3 months. 3 months. I glanced toward the cracked ceiling above us. Rain leaked through 2 spots I immediately noticed. The heating system had not worked in years. Half the house was unsafe, yet somehow she had kept 2 children alive through it all. "You knew this place belonged to someone," I said. "I knew nobody lived here," she answered quietly. There was no anger in her voice, only exhaustion. the kind that settled deep into a person's bones. The little girl suddenly coughed again. A small sound, but it echoed through the room. Emily immediately knelt beside her. Her hand touched the child's forehead. Worry flashed across her face before she could hide it. Mothers never really hide fear. They only carry it. "Sophie's been sick?" I asked. Emily looked away. "Just a cold." The answer came too fast. I had heard enough lies in my life to recognize one. The little boy finally spoke. "Mom has not slept much." Emily closed her eyes for a second, embarrassed. The boy continued anyway. "She stays awake when it rains because she worries the roof will leak on us." Something twisted inside my chest. The mansion had once held expensive parties, politicians, business leaders, people who measured success by numbers and appearances. Now the grand estate sheltered a tired mother using buckets to catch rainwater. Life had a strange sense of humor. I looked at the children again. Sophie was hugging a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. Noah stood protectively beside his sister, even though he was still just a kid himself. Neither looked spoiled. Neither looked entitled. They looked grateful for things most people ignored. Heat, soup, a dry blanket. Emily slowly stood. "If you want us gone, we will leave tomorrow morning." Her voice trembled despite her effort to keep it steady. "I just need one night." One night. Outside. Thunder rolled across the sky again. I thought about sending them away. It would have been simple, logical, clean. Instead, I found myself staring at the empty chair beside the stove. The chair where someone had probably sat every night making sure those children felt safe. And for the first time in years, I hated how empty my own life felt. "Nobody is leaving tonight," I said. The relief that crossed Emily's face lasted less than a second. But I saw it, and somehow that brief look stayed with me long after the storm outside began to fade. The storm finally passed sometime after midnight. The mansion settled into an uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional creak of old wood. Emily put the knife away, but the distance between us remained. Trust did not appear overnight, especially not for people who had spent too long surviving. I offered them one of the guest rooms on the first floor where the roof was still solid. Emily refused immediately. "We are fine where we are." Her answer was polite but firm. I almost smiled. Most people changed the moment they learned who I was. They became nervous, eager, or impressed. Emily seemed determined to remain none of those things. "That room has heat," I said. "This wing barely does. We have blankets. The room has a working bathroom. We have water." I looked at her for a second. "You are not making this easy." For the first time that night, a faint smile touched her face. It disappeared almost immediately, but it was there. Real. Human. Noah suddenly spoke from behind her. "Does the room have a door that locks?" Emily looked embarrassed. I did not answer right away. The question carried more weight than a child should have needed to ask. "Yes," I finally said. "It does." Noah nodded. That seemed to settle the matter for him. An hour later, they moved into the guest room. I watched from the hallway as Emily carefully tucked Sophie beneath clean blankets. The little girl was asleep before her head fully touched the pillow. Noah lasted another few minutes before exhaustion won. Emily remained awake, sitting beside the bed, watching them breathe. Mothers like her never really rested. They only paused. I should have left. Instead, I found myself standing in the doorway. "You can sleep," I said quietly. "They are safe here." Emily stared at the floor. "You do not know that." The words were not directed at me. They sounded older than tonight, older than the mansion, older than the storm. I understood more than she realized. There had been years when I did not trust safety either. Years when every peaceful moment felt temporary. Maybe not, I admitted, but they are safer than they were yesterday. She finally looked at me. The exhaustion in her eyes softened for a moment. Not trust, not yet, but something close to relief. As I turned to leave, a small voice stopped me. Sophie had opened her eyes. Barely awake, she reached toward a chair beside the bed where an old hand towel rested. "Your hand," she whispered. I looked down. Earlier, a splinter from a broken railing had left a small scratch across my knuckles. Nothing important. Sophie picked up the towel and held it out toward me. "You should clean it." I stood there for a second, unable to speak. Then I accepted the towel. "Thank you." She smiled sleepily and curled back beneath the blankets. The room grew quiet again. But something had changed. I had walked into that mansion expecting dust, silence, and memories. Instead, a 6-year-old girl had handed me kindness. And somehow that felt far more dangerous than anything I had faced in years. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the tall windows for the first time in years. Dust floated through golden beams of light, turning the old mansion into something almost beautiful again. I woke earlier than usual. Habit. Some people carried alarms. I carried responsibility. As I walked downstairs, I expected silence. Instead, I heard laughter. Soft, brief, real. It stopped me halfway down the staircase. The sound came from the kitchen. When I entered, Noah and Sophie were sitting at the table eating pancakes. Actual pancakes. Slightly uneven, slightly burned around the edges. Sophie seemed delighted by them anyway. Emily stood near the stove, looking surprised to see me. "Good morning," she said cautiously. I looked at the plate in front of the children. "You found food." Her cheeks turned slightly red. There was flour in one of the storage cabinets. I almost laughed. That flour had probably been there for years. Somehow, she had turned it into breakfast. Sophie grinned at me. "Mom says they are not perfect." She held up a fork. "I think they are." Noah nodded in agreement. The confidence of children always fascinated me. They could find joy in things adults overlooked. Emily glanced at the empty coffee cup near me. "I made coffee too." I looked at her. "You made breakfast for someone who owns the house you occupied without permission." Her expression tightened immediately. "You do not have to eat it." There it was again. Pride. Not arrogance. Dignity. A difference many people never learned. I sat down anyway. The coffee was strong. The pancakes were imperfect. The kitchen felt warmer than it had in decades. For several minutes, nobody said much. Then Sophie slid off her chair and walked toward me. She held something in her small hand. The stuffed rabbit with one missing ear. "His name is Oliver," she announced. "He protects us at night." I accepted the rabbit carefully. "And that is a very important job." Sophie nodded seriously. "He works very hard." Emily smiled despite herself. The sight caught me off guard. She looked younger when she smiled, less burdened, less tired. Then I noticed something else. A framed photograph sitting beside her backpack. It showed Emily standing with Noah and Sophie at what looked like a county fair. All three were smiling, happy, safe. Whatever had brought them to this mansion had happened after that picture was taken. Something had changed. Something significant. Emily quickly turned the frame face down when she noticed me looking at it. The movement was subtle, but I saw it. Secrets often revealed themselves in moments people thought nobody noticed. Outside, the sun continued climbing higher. Inside, the mansion felt different. The walls seemed less empty. The rooms seemed less haunted. And for the first time in a very long time, I found myself wondering not how quickly these strangers would leave, but what had happened that forced them to come here in the first place. That afternoon, I left the mansion for a few hours. Meetings, calls, decisions, the usual rhythm of a life built on responsibility and control. Yet none of it held my attention. Every conversation felt distant. Every number on every report seemed meaningless compared to the image of a little girl proudly defending a stuffed rabbit with one missing ear. By late afternoon, I found myself driving back. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with streaks of gold and orange. As I approached the mansion, something unusual caught my eye. The front lawn looked different, cleaner. I parked and stepped out. Noah was dragging fallen branches into a pile twice his size. Sophie was gathering smaller sticks and placing them into a bucket. Emily stood near the front porch with gardening gloves she must have found somewhere inside the house. For a moment, I simply watched. Nobody had asked them to do any of this. They were treating the property as if it mattered, as if it belonged to them, or perhaps as if they belonged to it. Noah noticed me first. "We are helping," he said quickly, as though he expected trouble. "I can see that." He looked relieved. Sophie ran toward me carrying a tiny flower she had discovered growing through a crack in the stone walkway. "Look." I crouched beside her. The flower was small, white petals, fragile. Somehow it had survived years of neglect. "That is impressive," I said. Sophie smiled. "Some mom says good things can grow in forgotten places." I glanced toward Emily. She was not looking at me. She was focused on trimming dead vines from the porch railing. Yet I knew exactly where that lesson had come from. Good things can grow in forgotten places. The words stayed with me long after Sophie ran back toward her brother. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, I found Emily sitting alone on the back porch. The air was cool. Crickets filled the silence. She held a cup of tea between both hands. For a while, neither of us spoke. The mansion stood quietly behind us, no longer empty, no longer entirely broken. "The kids like it here," I finally said. Emily looked toward the dark yard. "They have not felt safe in a long time." There it was again. That word. Safe. The way she said it made it sound precious. Rare. "What happened?" I asked carefully. She lowered her eyes to the tea. The steam drifted upward between us. "I made some bad decisions. Everybody does." A faint smile touched her lips. "Not everybody pays for them the same way." The sadness behind those words felt heavier than anything she had told me so far. Before I could say anything else, a car appeared briefly on the road beyond the property gates. Its headlights swept across the trees before disappearing into the distance. Emily immediately stiffened. The reaction was instant, uncontrolled. Fear disguised as caution. Then the car was gone. The road was empty again, but I noticed something important. Emily did not relax, not completely. And for the first time, I realized she was not hiding from bad luck. She was hiding from something much more personal. The next morning, I could not shake the image of Emily's reaction to those headlights. Fear leaves fingerprints. You learn to recognize them if you spend enough years watching people. Some fears come from uncertainty. Others come from memory. Hers came from expectation. She had not reacted like someone surprised by danger. She had reacted like someone waiting for it. I found her in the library shortly after sunrise. The old room smelled of leather, dust, and forgotten history. Sunlight spilled across shelves that had not been touched in years. Emily stood near one of the windows, organizing a stack of books Noah and Sophie had discovered the day before. She looked calmer than she had the previous night, but there was still a tiredness in her eyes that sleep could not fix. "You did not sleep much," I said. She gave a small smile. "Neither did you." "Fair enough." For a moment we simply stood there, surrounded by silence. Then she picked up a worn photograph that had slipped from between the pages of an old book. It showed my parents standing on the front steps of the mansion decades ago. Young, hopeful, unaware of how life would eventually change them. "They looked happy," Emily said softly. I studied the picture. For a while they were. She handed it back carefully. The gesture reminded me of how she treated everything she owned. Nothing wasted, nothing taken for granted. Later that afternoon, I arranged for groceries to be delivered without telling her. Fresh fruit, milk, bread, medicine for Sophie's lingering cough. Simple things, necessary things. When the delivery arrived, Noah stared at the boxes as if Christmas had come early. Sophie nearly squealed when she found strawberries. Emily, however, looked uncomfortable. "You did not have to do this," she said. "I know. We cannot repay you. I was not asking you to." She folded her arms, not defensive, protective. People do not usually help for no reason. The words lingered between us. They revealed more than she intended. I looked toward the children unpacking groceries at the kitchen table. Maybe they should. Emily followed my gaze. Noah was carefully stacking cans into neat rows. Sophie was trying to balance 3 apples at once and failing spectacularly. For the first time that day, Emily laughed. A real laugh, warm and genuine. Then it faded. Her phone, sitting on the counter, suddenly lit up. The screen displayed no name, only a number. Emily froze. The color drained from her face. The phone continued vibrating against the countertop. Once, twice, 3 times. She did not answer. She did not even touch it. Eventually, the screen went dark. The kitchen remained silent. Noah looked up from the groceries. Sophie stopped smiling. They had seen this before. Many times. I could tell. Emily slowly picked up the phone and turned it face down. Her hands were trembling. And in that moment, I realized whatever she was running from had finally found a way to reach her. The atmosphere inside the mansion changed after that phone call. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone outside would notice. But I saw it. Emily smiled less. She checked the windows more often. Every sound from the driveway pulled her attention for a second too long. Fear had returned to the room like an unwelcome guest. That evening, after Noah and Sophie went upstairs, I found Emily standing near the front entrance. She was staring through the glass panels beside the door into the darkness beyond the porch lights. "How many times has that number called?" I asked quietly. She did not jump. Somehow she always seemed to know when I entered a room. "Too many." Her answer came without hesitation. "Who is it?" For several seconds she remained silent. Then she laughed softly, but there was no humor in it, only exhaustion. "The person I spent 2 years trying to escape." The words settled heavily between us. I did not interrupt. People carried truths like fragile glass. Pushed too hard, and they shattered. "His name is Ryan," she continued. "When I met him, I thought he was charming, successful, confident." She looked down at her hands. "Sometimes the people who promise safety are the ones who take it away." I understood that more than she realized. When I left, he could not accept it. He kept calling, showing up, making promises, making threats. None of it mattered. I only cared about protecting Noah and Sophie. Her voice remained calm, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the table beside her. So we moved, then moved again, then again. I finally understood. The constant fear, the suitcases, the hidden life. The mansion was never supposed to be a home. It was a hiding place. "Why not go to the authorities?" I asked. Emily smiled sadly. I tried. That was all she said. Yet it explained everything. Some battles exhausted people long before they found solutions. A sudden burst of laughter echoed from upstairs. Sophie, followed by Noah pretending to be annoyed. The sound immediately softened Emily's expression. Her entire face changed when she heard her children, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "They deserve a normal life," she whispered. "A school they can stay in. Friends they do not have to leave behind. A bedroom that is theirs next month and next year." I looked toward the staircase, toward the rooms that had once stood empty. Maybe they finally found one. Emily slowly turned toward me. There was gratitude in her eyes, but also concern. "You do not understand." "Then help me understand." She hesitated. "If Ryan finds us here, he will not stop." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees surrounding the property. The mansion stood strong against the darkness, older than fear, older than secrets. I met her gaze without looking away. "And Emily." My voice was calm, certain. "Nobody decides what happens in this house except me." For the first time since the phone call, she looked less afraid. Not because the problem was gone, but because she was no longer carrying it alone. The following week brought something none of us expected. Normal days. The kind most people never appreciate until they lose them. Noah spent his mornings reading in the library. Sophie claimed ownership of a corner of the garden where she planted flowers she was convinced would grow taller than she was. Emily began sleeping through the night more often. Not every night, but enough for the dark circles beneath her eyes to slowly fade. The mansion seemed to breathe differently now. Rooms that had sat silent for years carried voices again. Laughter echoed down hallways. Lights stayed on after sunset. For the first time since inheriting the property, it felt less like a monument to the past and more like a place where life could continue. One afternoon, I found Sophie sitting cross-legged on the floor of the old study. Papers and crayons surrounded her. She looked up when I entered. "Do you know how to draw castles?" she asked. "Not very well." "That is okay. Neither do I." She handed me a crayon anyway. 20 minutes later, we were both staring at what appeared to be a castle designed by two completely unqualified architects. Sophie seemed extremely proud of it. As I stood to leave, a folded piece of paper slipped from a nearby shelf and landed near my feet. It looked old, yellowed around the edges, forgotten, curious. I picked it up. At first, I thought it was just another document left behind by previous staff. Then I saw the date, 12 years ago. My attention sharpened immediately. The paper was a newspaper clipping, a small local article. I almost set it aside until one photograph caught my eye. The image showed a crowded street after a traffic accident caused by heavy rain. Emergency responders, bystanders, chaos. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed someone in the background, a young woman kneeling beside a frightened teenage boy. Her hand rested on his shoulder while she spoke to him. The boy's face was partially turned away, but I knew exactly who he was. Me, 12 years younger, before the suits, before the power, before I became the man everyone knew. My pulse slowed. I looked closer at the young woman in the photograph. Blonde hair, kind eyes, a familiar face. Impossible. I turned the clipping over. The article mentioned a local college student who had stayed with injured strangers until help arrived. Her name was printed beneath the picture. Emily Carter. For several seconds, I simply stared at the page. Memories returned in fragments. Rain, sirens, confusion, and a calm voice telling a terrified teenager that everything would be okay. I had not thought about that day in years, yet suddenly I remembered it. More importantly, I remembered her. At that exact moment, I heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. Emily appeared in the doorway carrying a basket of laundry. She smiled when she saw Sophie. Then she noticed the newspaper clipping in my hand. Her smile vanished instantly, because she recognized it too. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Sophie continued coloring at the table, completely unaware that the room had suddenly become much smaller. Emily stared at the newspaper clipping in my hand. I stared at her. 12 years disappeared between us. The frightened college student from the photograph and the exhausted mother standing in front of me were the same person. "You remember," she said quietly. It was not a question. I nodded. "Not at first." My voice felt distant, but I remember now. Emily lowered the laundry basket onto a chair. The memories came back in fragments. Rain pouring from a dark sky, a crowded intersection, a teenage version of me sitting on a curb after an accident, overwhelmed and scared, and one stranger who stayed beside me long after everyone else moved on. "You talked to me for almost an hour," I said. Emily gave a small smile. "You looked like you needed it." The simplicity of her answer somehow made it more powerful. She had not known who I would become. She had not expected anything in return. She had simply seen someone afraid and decided to help. Years later, life had brought her back into my path. Not as a stranger, not as a coincidence, as the person who had unknowingly changed the course of one terrible day in my life. That evening, after the children went to bed, we sat together on the back porch. The air was warm. Fireflies drifted through the darkness beyond the yard. The mansion glowed softly behind us. A place that once felt abandoned now felt alive. "I never told anyone about that day," I admitted. Emily looked surprised. "Why?" I thought about it for a moment. "Because people expected me to be strong, confident, certain." I looked out across the property. Nobody wants to admit they were scared once. Emily laughed softly. "Everybody is scared sometimes." The honesty in her voice made me smile. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then headlights appeared beyond the distant gates again. This time, neither of us panicked. The vehicle slowed briefly before continuing down the road and disappearing. Emily watched until the lights were gone. Then she exhaled. Not fear, relief. Real relief. "I think I am tired of running," she said. I looked toward the mansion, toward the windows glowing warmly upstairs where Noah and Sophie slept peacefully. "Then stop." Emily turned toward me. Just like that, just like that." She shook her head, smiling. "You make everything sound simple." Not simple. I looked back at the house. Worth it. Weeks later, the mansion looked completely different. Flowers lined the walkways. Children's drawings hung on refrigerators and bulletin boards. Laughter filled rooms that had been silent for years. One evening, Sophie handed me a new picture she had drawn. It showed 4 people standing in front of a large house. Me, Emily, Noah, Sophie. Above us, she had written 3 simple words in bright crayon. Our home forever. I stared at the drawing longer than I should have. Then I looked up at the family standing beside me. Sometimes people search for treasure in distant places. Sometimes they search for power, success, or meaning. I spent years believing I had everything. Then, one rainy night, I opened the door to a forgotten mansion and discovered the one thing I never realized was missing.